Hi everybody, my name is Cthulhu. Welcome to a special episode of the show with no name. I'd like to introduce your host, but his name doesn't translate into my language. I just call him Oh, now I'm dizzy. I'll let him take it away. Thanks, Cthulhu. Hello, I'm Eric Smith, and I'm here to talk about something very near and dear to me. As I record this, it is October 26th, and with Halloween just a few days away, I thought I'd do something a little different. Although I haven't done that many of these videos, so it may not be as different as I think it is. Anyway, with it being Halloween, the Halloween season, I thought I'd talk about one of the grand masters of horror, H.P. Lovecraft. More to the point, I want to talk about his legacy. For those who don't know, Lovecraft was born in 1890, and before his death in 1937, he created one of the most enduring mythos of all time, which is, of course, the Cthulhu Mythos. Lovecraft wrote a great number of stories that all tied together. Not all of the stories, but most of the stories tied together with this sort of all-encompassing mythos of the great unknown and ancient gods and mind-numbing terror. There were themes of knowledge that man was not meant to possess, creatures that could drive a man mad. Just all sorts of wonderful things. The greatest of those being Cthulhu. And Cthulhu and the mythos permeates our culture nowadays. Everything from movies, TV shows, games, music, books. Cthulhu was on South Park. They've done a Lovecraft episode of Warehouse 13 for those fans of that great sci-fi show. But of course, literature is where the Cthulhu mythos really shines through. I don't know that there's a horror author today that hasn't been influenced by the writings of H.P. Lovecraft. And so I wanted to talk about a couple sets of books today that are based on the things that Lovecraft created. First, Fantasy Flight Games, excuse me, has created the granddaddy, I shouldn't say created, but publishes anyway, the granddaddy of all Cthulhu games, Arkham Horror, which is a fantastic game where investigators attempt to close otherworldly gates while surviving the horrors that are seeping through. And Fantasy Flights, a few years ago, started publishing some novels based on that game. So you have novels that are based on a game that are based on other books. And I think my head is about to explode. But what we have here so far, they've published 5 books. The first 2 here are Ghouls of the Miskatonic and Bones of Yopassi, however you say that, by Graham McNeil. There's that one. There's that one. These are the first 2 books in the Dark Water trilogy. After that, we have Dance of the Damned by Alan Blight and Lies of Solace by John French. There's that one. There's that. Oop. Love those covers. These are the first 2 books in the... Wow, I should have my glasses on because I cannot read what this says. First 2 books in the Lord of Nightmares trilogy. There we go. And then finally, the 5th book is Feeders from Within by Peter J. Evans. I love these covers. This is a standalone. And, excuse me, these books all basically take place in the 30s, I believe. I've read the first 2 of each of the 2 trilogies. I have not read the standalone book yet. But they're just great Lovecraftian horror. They use characters from the game Arkham Horror. They use characters from Lovecraft himself. There are many references to other Lovecraft stories. And it has your typical ordinary humans trying to survive the cosmic horrors of H.P. Lovecraft and the Cthulhu Mythos. Um, Lots of, again, forbidden knowledge, the Necronomicon, which, again, something that permeates culture. Um, who hasn't heard of the Necronomicon? Well, you can thank H.P. Lovecraft for that. These are great books. Um, Lovecraft's writing can be a little hard to get through sometimes. I really have to be in the right mood to read the original stories. These are much more accessible, very easy to read. And I believe, according to Fantasy Flight's website, there are 3 more books coming out shortly. The last book in each of the 2 trilogies, and another standalone novel. I'm very much looking forward to those. I'd like to finish those trilogies and see what happens, and it's always nice to have an extra Lovecraftian book on the shelf to pick up and read, so that standalone novel will be nice. Excuse me. Fantasy Flight has done some great stuff. Their Lovecraftian games, Arkham Horror, Elder Sign, Mansions of Madness, are all fantastic games. They have a new one coming out called Eldritch Horror, which is Lovecraft on a global scale. And the books fit in well with that. If you haven't read Lovecraft before, you could start with this. You don't have to have read Lovecraft to get into these books. You just have to be interested in good old-fashioned cosmic horror. So I highly recommend, where's that last one? Because that's got a wonderful cover. Highly recommend these books for anyone that wants to read Lovecraft. The second set of books that I want to talk about are all by an author named Edward Lee. Now, Edward Lee, I believe, at least I consider him to be the master of hardcore horror. He's a great writer. His characters are always fascinating, and his stories range from just absolutely terrifying horror to over-the-top, hilarious stories. But one of the things that permeates most of his writing is just some crazy, crazy sex and gore and just over-the-top scenes of violence. Excuse me. But he is an author that I love. I believe I have more Edward Lee books than I have books by any other author. Glancing over at the shelf there where all my Edward Lee books are. They're fantastic. But Edward Lee is a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and a few years ago decided to write some Lovecraft homages, I suppose. One of the things I like about the books that he's done is that they're all a little bit different. So I'm going to go over them one by one here. First, we have the Dunwich Horror. There we go. Which is a companion to The Shadow over Innsmouth, I believe. And what he did with this book was the main character is a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I believe it takes place around the same time that Lovecraft was alive and writing. But anyway, this gentleman wants to follow the path of Lovecraft, go to the places he went to, see what inspired him. And what happens is he stumbles on the town of Dunwich, which was supposed to be Lovecraft's inspiration for Innsmouth. And the protagonist discovers that the Lovecraft story wasn't necessarily as fictional as one might suppose. And of course, he ends up getting involved with monsters, and since it's Edward Lee, crazy monster sex. But great book there, and this one's by published by Deadite Press. A number of these came in limited editions, but I believe they're all available from Deadite Press now in a nice, affordable trade paperback. So, Dunwich Horror. Next, we have Pages Torn from a Travel Journal. This is my limited edition copy, but it just recently came out from Deadite Press. And this is ostensibly pages torn from H.P. Lovecraft's travel journal. He's on a bus ride. The bus breaks down. While he's waiting for repairs, he goes for a walk and gets involved in some crazy stuff that I don't want to go into detail about because I don't want to give the story away. But it does involve something else that Edward Lee has written about. Don't want to say too much. You really should just read it. Again, Deadite Press has published an affordable volume. I don't remember how much I paid for this little ditty. It's number 24 of only 300 copies, but pages torn from Travel Journal. Wow, then we have The Haunter of the Threshold. This is a modern-day sequel to The Haunter of the Dark, I believe is the Lovecraft story. The original story takes place 20s, 30s. Not sure exactly when. This is modern day. There is a dark crystal, if I'm not mistaken, in the original story that pops up again in this. And in typical Edward Lee style, there is crazy, crazy sex and violence and tentacles, because it's difficult to have an H.P. Lovecraft story without tentacles. It's not really true, but all stories should have tentacles, right? So, Haunter of the Threshold, really good one. Really over the top, really disgusting, just the way I like it. Next we have Trolley number 1852. Now this one's a little different. It starts with H.P. Lovecraft. He's broke, and maybe his writer's block, if I'm not mistaken. He gets an invitation to write a special story for a magazine. And the thing is, it's got to be a pornographic story. Well, Lovecraft needs the money, so the bulk of this book is that pornographic H.P. Lovecraft story. So it's got the bookend with Lovecraft at the beginning and in the end, but the middle, the main part of it, is this bizarre Lovecraftian story, or Lovecraft story, I should say, since he wrote it. Deals with a brothel from, wow, another dimensional brothel. I'm not sure exactly how to describe it. I always hate to say too much. I don't want to give anything away. These books really should just be read for yourself. But this probably comes closest to Lovecraft's own style, since it's supposed to be Lovecraft himself that wrote it. Again, Deadite Press. And then finally, my personal favorite, we have the Dunwich Romance. Again, this is my limited edition copy. I believe this is coming out from Deadite. But don't hold me to that. Dunwich Romance is a companion piece to the Lovecraft story, the Dunwich Horror. The main character, I suppose, in the Dunwich Horror is Wilbur Whately. And he, I say sort of the main character because I'm not sure there's really any one character that appears in that story more than any other. But everything sort of revolves around him and his family. But the original story covers a lot of ground without getting too deep into the personalities of the characters. Well, what this does, the Dunwich Romance, Edward Lee has taken a little chunk out of the Dunwich Horror and really gotten into the life of Wilbur Whately. Sort of a filling in of some things that were glossed over in the original Lovecraft story. And as its title implies, Wilbur falls in love. But since it's an Ed Lee book, excuse me, it is, again, over the top, lots of crazy sex, lots of crazy violence. And, well, if you've read the original story, you know how this one's going to end. But it's all about the journey, right? So I highly recommend any of these Ed Lee books. Again, my personal favorite of the 5, although they're all good. I don't think I've read anything by Edward Lee that I didn't absolutely love. Excuse me, I'm sure I'll talk about some of his other stuff on other videos, because he's just a fantastic author. And from what I've seen, a really, really nice guy. So those are the two things, the two bits of Lovecraft's legacy that I wanted to talk about. I could make so many videos regarding Lovecraft. If I glance over here, I can see 3 of my Lovecraft games. I've got a couple other games that have expansions that deal with Cthulhu. There's a game called Smash Up, and its second expansion was titled the obligatory Cthulhu expansion, because you gotta have Cthulhu. Over there on one of these other shelves, there's a whole collection of anthologies of new short stories based on the Lovecraft mythos. Oh, they're right over there. And all sorts of authors. I could go into the different people, all the different authors, all the different books based on the Lovecraft mythos, the movies, Reanimator, classic, wonderful horror movie. But I've rambled on long enough, I suppose. See, I even have my What Would Cthulhu Do t-shirt here for this special Halloween video. So get out there, read some H.P. Lovecraft, pick up some Edward Lee, pick up some Arkham Horror novels. Oh, I did want to mention the Arkham Horror books. I picked up all of these on Amazon. I do believe they're also available on the Fantasy Flight website. I've only seen one of them at Barnes & Noble's, which kind of bums me out. I'd like to see that sort of thing out there on the shelves for people to pick up. But what are you going to do? Edward Lee, Deadite Press. Look him up on, again, Amazon. And go to Horror World Forum and chat with the author. He's, again, seems like a great guy. He's busy writing. Last I heard, he's working on a few things. Plus, he's making movies. And he always jumps on the Horror World website to chat with his fans. So, anyway, I'm getting way off topic here. Lovecraft, Cthulhu. Have a happy Halloween and keep reading.